Imagine just for a second that it all went to zero, not in a dramatic movie way. Quietly. The account you'd been building, the thing you'd been calling progress, gone. You're sitting at the kitchen table the next morning with a coffee going cold next to you. And you're not even crying, you're just staring at the wall doing the math that doesn't have a bottom. No portfolio, no cushion, no head start. Same age you are right now, same responsibilities, but the scoreboard reset to nothing overnight. And the strange part isn't the fear. It's the question that comes after the fear. The one that's weirdly clarifying. If you had to start completely over today, knowing only what you actually know, what would you do first? Because here's the tension. Most people, asked that question, immediately reach for the exciting answer. The investment, the asset, the move. And that instinct, that very normal instinct, is exactly the thing that keeps people poor. This is Rocket Finance. This channel exists because almost all money advice is built backwards. It sells you the thrilling part first and quietly skips the boring sequence that actually does the work. We don't do that here. We take the machinery apart and look at it honestly, including the parts the financial industry phrases more gently, so you don't notice they're not really sure either. Today we're running the actual thought experiment, building wealth from absolute zero, in the real order it works, not the order that looks good on a thumbnail. If that's useful, a like or a subscribe genuinely helps this reach the next person staring at that wall. No pressure, let's get into it. So you're at zero. Where do you actually start? Not investing. I know. That's the part everyone wants to skip to. But the very first move, the literal foundation under everything else, is cash flow. It's the gap between what comes in and what goes out, and specifically how much room exists inside that gap to do anything on purpose instead of just reacting to the month. And here's the brutal part nobody leads with. You cannot invest your way out of an income problem. There is no fund clever enough to fix a margin that doesn't exist. People skip this constantly. They want to talk about the S&P 500 and compounding and which account to open, while their actual monthly breathing room is, $11. You can have a flawless theoretical understanding of asset allocation and $0 to allocate. Cash flow is what creates options, and options, not returns, are the entire game. So the genuine first investment isn't a fund, it's your own ability to earn. A skill the market will actually pay for, put to work in a job or a business that throws off enough to cover your life, knock down debt, build a little savings, and still leave something to deploy. And I want to be honest about what that looks like, because the clean version is usually a lie. Picture a 27-year-old who's genuinely good at their job, decent salary, looks completely fine from the outside, but carrying high-interest debt, supporting other people, and quietly impatient because no amount of being careful seems to move the needle. The honest move there isn't develop a millionaire mindset. It's something boring and tiring and frankly a little grim. Picking up extra work, contract hours, a side thing for a defined stretch, not forever. Specifically to widen that gap enough to escape the expensive debt and finally have capital to deploy instead of just surviving to the next paycheck. And the point of that stretch isn't the work itself. It's buying back the margin so the hard stretch can end. For a lot of you, the real answer is more training, a credential, a job change. Not because effort is noble, it's mostly just exhausting, but because the math genuinely does not move until your earning power moves. That's not motivation, that's just where the leverage actually is. Okay, so the income improves. You did the hard part, the gap opened up, more money is coming in. Here's the trap. And it's a good trap because it's invisible and it feels exactly like winning. Your lifestyle expands at precisely the speed your income does. The raise lands, and within a month it's fully spoken for. Slightly nicer place, slightly nicer car, the subscriptions multiply like they're alive and breeding, the takeout creeps up because, hey, you earned it. On the surface you're doing better. Your life looks like progress. But the gap, the only thing that actually builds wealth, is right back at zero. You just bought a more expensive version of the same problem. And now it's harder to unwind because the bigger life stopped feeling optional. So let me be blunt, because the whole industry blurs this on purpose. A high income is not wealth. Wealth lives in the distance between what you earn and what you spend, and if that distance never widens, you will work for your lifestyle until your body physically stops letting you, instead of your money ever working for you. There's a version of avoiding this that almost looks like a magic trick up close, except it isn't a trick, which is the entire point. Think about someone who walks away from full-time work in their 40s. Not a founder, not a lottery, not an inheritance. Just a high earner who did one unglamorous thing on purpose for a long time. He let his lifestyle lag his income by about 5 years, deliberately as a rule, not as a mood. Making $250,000, he lived like 150. Climbed to 500, he lived like 250. That's it, there is no step 2. Do that for 1 year, and it's mildly annoying and feels pointless. Do it for 10 or 15, and the accumulated, reinvested gap quietly becomes a genuinely different life. One with an exit built into it. He didn't earn some impossible, mythical number. He just refused to let spending sprint alongside income the way it does for almost everyone. And the uncomfortable mirror is, most people do the exact opposite, and never decide to. Nobody sits down and chooses lifestyle creep. It just happens. Raise by raise, the way most financial damage happens. Not in one dramatic mistake, but in 1,000 reasonable feeling ones. Now here's the part that actually reframes the whole thing, and it goes straight back to that morning at the kitchen table. People do not fail at building wealth because they picked the wrong investment. Say it differently. The asset you didn't pick is almost never why you're behind. People fail because they do the right things in the wrong order. There is a sequence, and skipping ahead in it is the single most common expensive mistake there is. So if you're at 0, here's the actual order. First, a basic emergency cushion. Money whose entire job is to make sure one bad week doesn't detonate the rest of the chain. Not because emergencies are rare and you're being cautious, because over a long enough window, they're statistically certain. You just don't get told the date. The car, the medical thing, the sudden gap between jobs, the specific one is a surprise. The existence of one is not. Without that cushion, every later step is one flat tire away from collapsing right back onto the expensive debt you just escaped. Second, that high-interest debt itself, the genuinely punishing kind, the revolving balance somewhere around 20%. And here's the thing, nobody frames honestly, because it doesn't sell a product. Paying off a balance at, let's say, 18% is mathematically a guaranteed 18% return. Zero risk, can't lose it. And it is extremely hard to reliably beat that anywhere in legitimate investing. So when someone with an 18% balance asks whether they should be investing instead, the unpopular honest answer is usually no, not yet. Because no normal investment dependably out-earns that. And the ones that promise to are how people lose the rest of their money too. The one nuance, and this is genuinely the only place the order bends, is an employer retirement match. If putting in $3,000 means your employer also drops in $3,000, that's 100% return the day it lands, before the market does anything at all. That's free money on a table with your name on it, and walking past free money to do literally anything else, including paying down debt, almost never makes mathematical sense. So even mid-debt, the rule is, capture the full match first, take the free money, then turn around and attack the expensive debt with everything. The lower interest stuff, a reasonable student loan, a mortgage, that waits its turn without guilt, as long as the plan can plausibly out-earn what it actually costs you. Not all debt is the same emergency. Treating a 3% loan like a 4-alarm fire while ignoring an 18% one feels responsible the entire time you're doing it. And it's one of the most expensive emotional mistakes there is. Notice what just happened. We're 4 steps in, and we have basically not talked about investing in the way people mean the word. That is not an accident. That is the point. The exciting part is structurally the 4th thing. not the first. So now, finally, the investing. The part you came here for. And the most important thing about it, the thing that's going to feel anticlimactic, is that it should be kind of boring. If your investing strategy is genuinely interesting, if it has a story, a thesis, a thing you're excited to explain at a dinner party, that is far more often a warning sign than a green light. The most exciting investments are usually exciting because someone needs them to be, so you'll move money toward them faster than you'd think. Early on, it is almost entirely not about being clever or being right about the future. It's about four unglamorous things: building the habit so contributing stops being a decision and becomes automatic; watching how markets actually behave so the next drop doesn't ambush you; getting used to the specific stomach feeling of your number going down without doing something panicked and dumb about it; and letting time run the compounding that no amount of cleverness can rush. The move is steady, boring contributions into simple, broad, boring vehicles. A broad index fund, a whole market ETF, a target date fund that handles the mix for you. Not because anything fancier is forbidden, but because at this stage the fancy stuff overwhelmingly just moves money from you to the people selling the fancy stuff, and the fees on it compound against you exactly as quietly as your returns compound for you. Don't overanalyze the entry point. Don't wait for the dip. The cost of waiting until you've found the perfect strategy is, in almost every realistic case, far larger than the cost of starting imperfectly today. The years you spend deciding are years the compounding never gets back. You'll adjust later. Everyone does. Momentum first. The perfect plan you start in 3 years loses to the okay plan you start this month, basically every time. And only then does it make sense to get genuinely intentional about where all of this is being held, which is the part that's almost criminally underexplained because it's invisible, and it is enormous. 2 people can buy the exact same fund on the same day, contribute the same amount, get the same market return, and end up in genuinely different places, purely based on the type of account that fund lived inside. The tax-advantaged accounts, the employer retirement plan, especially with that match attached, the accounts built around tax-free growth, the health-focused account that gets unusually generous treatment for medical costs. None of these are exotic or insider. They're not secret. They're just the difference between keeping your entire return and quietly handing a slice of it back every single year. And a slice handed back every year, compounded across 30 years, isn't a slice anymore. It's a wing of the building. Let me show you the actual scale, because tax-advantaged is better, is the kind of thing people nod at without ever feeling it. Picture $100,000, no new contributions, just growing on its own. In an account where the growth isn't taxed along the way, earning around 10%, that $100,000 becomes roughly $1.6 million in a bit under 29 years. Same $100,000, same market, but in a taxable account where the drag pulls your effective return down to around 8%, it still gets to $1.6 million. It just takes about 36 years to get there. Same money, same investments, same person. The only variable is the wrapper, and the wrapper cost you, roughly 7 extra years of your life waiting. That is not a small thing. That is the most expensive paperwork decision most people never consciously make. Remember the kitchen table, the cold coffee, the reset to zero, the wall? Here's why I keep going back to it. If you actually had to start over, the thing that would hurt most isn't that the number went to zero. It's realizing how many of the levers that matter were invisible the whole first time. You were doing the visible things, earning, being careful, while the order, the account wrappers, the tax drag, did the real work silently, mostly off-screen, mostly never explained to you. You can do everything right at the surface and still feel like you're treading water because the levers that move the most are the ones nobody put in front of you. That's not a you problem. That's a structural failure of how this gets explained. Once you're genuinely accumulating, the next idea is one of the freeing ones and also one of the most violated. Build through engines you actually understand. Not the most complicated thing. The thing you can explain out loud, with conviction, how it makes money, what makes it work, what could break it. If you can't describe why an investment should succeed, you don't own an investment, you own a hope. And a hope behaves very differently than an investment the first time it drops 30%. You sell the hope at the worst possible moment because you never had a reason to hold it. For one person, that clarity is real estate. For another, it's a business they actually run. For another, it's a plain stock portfolio. The vehicle matters less than this. Wealth tends to get created through concentration in the thing you understand deeply, and then protected through diversification later. Most people invert that too. They diversify into 9 things they don't understand and call it safe. Spreading thin across confusion isn't safety. It's just confusion with extra steps, and it feels prudent the entire time. Then the priority quietly shifts, and this is the part almost nobody mentions until it's too late. As what you've built gets bigger, protecting it starts to matter as much as growing it. Not in a paranoid way. In a one lawsuit, one bad partnership, one sloppy bit of compliance can erase a decade way. Proper structures, adequate insurance, clean documentation, none of it makes you richer. It just stops a single bad event from deleting the progress. And here's the twist most people miss. This is also the stage where the genuinely wealthy stop selling things. Instead of liquidating an asset and triggering a tax bill on the gain, they borrow against it. Low-cost debt tied to a strong asset, freeing up cash while the asset keeps appreciating and never technically gets sold. I am not telling you to go do that. I'm telling you it exists because it's a perfect example of how the rules quietly reward people who already have assets, and how almost none of that ever gets explained to the person sitting at the kitchen table doing the math with no bottom. The system isn't hiding it from you exactly. It just never volunteered it. The last piece is the least urgent feeling and the most underrated, actually thinking long-term, on purpose, not vague, someday. A real sense of direction. What you'd need to sustain the life you want, how it's structured, where it eventually goes, what it's even for. Wealth without a destination tends to dissolve. The version that works isn't a rigid 40-year spreadsheet. It's more like keeping a rough 10-year picture, then working backward. What does 5 years need to look like, 3 years this year, and revisiting it more than once. We chronically overestimate what we can do in 1 year and badly underestimate what's possible in 10, mostly because we never actually sit down and define the 10. So, pull it all the way back. Here's what nobody tells you, said plainly. If you lost everything tomorrow and had to rebuild from zero, the thing that would save you wouldn't be a brilliant investment. It would be the sequence. Earn enough to open a gap. Refuse to let your lifestyle eat the gap. Then run the order. Cushion, expensive debt, free matches, boring consistent investing, the right accounts, engines you understand, protection, direction. Almost none of that is clever. All of it is consistent, and consistency unglamorously beats cleverness over any timeline that actually matters. So picture yourself again at that kitchen table, coffee gone cold, the number reset to 0, the wall. Here's the reframe, and I mean it. That sinking feeling isn't proof you're bad with money. It's proof that the levers that mattered most were kept off the table while you were quietly graded on willpower. You're not failing. The explanation you were handed was broken. You're not crazy for feeling behind in a system that mostly explains itself to people who are already ahead. Starting from 0 isn't the catastrophe. The catastrophe is doing it twice without ever being shown the order. And now you actually have it. If this made something click, subscribe so the next one finds you too, and drop a like so it finds the next person staring at that wall. Thanks for sitting with it. This is Rocket Finance.